Hello, and welcome to the GamesForum Online Mobile Gaming Trends panel. My name is Verani. I'm head of business development for Wappier, and I'm going to be your host or moderating today's discussion for y'all. A little background, panelists can introduce themselves, but maybe just first, who is Wappier? We're an AI company. We have an intelligent revenue management platform that helps mobile game companies effectively to make more money outside of core gameplay. We do couple main solutions. We do optimizations for IAP pricing. So whether it's geo-targeted prices, localized for different countries, or pricing optimization around special offers using some of our machine learning technology around likely to spend, to even engagement solutions where we have, most prominently a loyalty program solution. But today's conversation is not about pricing or even how to engage your players with loyalty, but we want to talk about current gaming trends out there and specifically around challenges and opportunities, and what's happening out there from perspective of game owners. So with that, I want to ask, I guess we'll start with you, Natasha, if you just introduce yourself and your company, and like to hear from you.
Yeah, great. I'm Natasha. I'm director of game design at Big Fish Games. We make, casual games and social casino. I've been a game designer for almost 15 years, about 10 of that in free-to-play and mobile. So yeah, it's always changing, right?
And you've been here since the birth of free-to-play, really 10 years, right? So yes, right? Yeah. Casey?
I'm Casey Dickinson. I am the GM and studio head for the FTX studio within Tilting Point. I've been in the games industry for 19 years and started with subscription MMOs back in the day for Sony Online, and then progressed now to free-to-play and mobile as a primary focus. But very excited to talk about where the market's been and where we're going.
Patrick.
Cool, Patrick McGrath. I am the head of the Berlin studio for 10 Square Games. I've been in the industry for about a decade, free to play the whole time, having a blast. Excited to talk about the future though, so.
Cool. All right, well, welcome guys, and a lot of great background and experience in free-to-play gaming. So, let's look. It's a huge business, right? Pick your favorite analyst report. Is it 70 billion? Is it 80 billion? I'm not sure what it is, but it's growing. But it's also an industry that, as for the time, it's been, constant state of flux and changes and opportunities with that too. So, we can't have any conversation. We meet someone or even talk about without first maybe talking about COVID. Right over the pandemic. You think back like. 2 years ago, or I guess we're almost 2 years ago when this started, right? We were having this, might have been a panel discussion where we were like, is GDC even going to happen or not? Now we're even still asking ourselves, is GDC going to happen now? 2 years later. What I'm curious about is obviously with the lockdown and everyone started playing games at home and diminishing of our options, we saw massive downloads, saw maybe a pretty big bump in terms of revenue for games, but then it's plateaued. And I'm curious what you're seeing now. We've been a couple years into it, and specifically if there are any like changes in behavior or just monetization. So maybe Patrick, maybe we'll start with you since you're on the screen, from right to left.
All right. So interesting trends, of course, like the big bump of downloads that kind of dropped off. I think there was quite a bit of saturation as far as the growth in the user base was massive, and it wasn't your traditional non-gamer coming into games, finding that one game, but playing multiple games. So one of the interesting things outside of monetization was just the engagement. So if you look at DAU from that huge run up from all of the downloads, it starts to taper off, I think, for most games in the industry. But if you looked at something like MAU, accounting something at a longer period of time for engagement, at least from the games that I've seen and talked to others, it's remained fairly stable. So what this kind of indicates to me is just you have more people playing more games, and whether or not you get into how many sessions or timing, I find it very interesting that the maturity has dramatically increased in a very short amount of time, to where you had a lot of people that just weren't even classifying as gamers, might not have had games on their devices, that now have multiple games. And from the monetization aspect, I think there used to be quite well, and we'll probably get into it, like, but having to go for a wider payer base, I think, is something that most games are trying to do because of that massive jump in DAU and really just user base for the games themselves.
Okay. Casey, you want to add anything? Thoughts about? I mean, it's we're hearing that players are seeing the same thing in terms of a bunch of new players coming into the game, sticking, playing games, playing around long. Any changes you've seen around different monetization strategies that you're using?
Yeah, I mean, our personal journey from FTX perspective was interesting through COVID. We were acquired kind of at the very beginning of it, and there was this massive wave of organic traffic, which was fantastic for the business for sure. Kind of going through that, and to layer on what Patrick was saying, in having a larger player base and spender base is always going to be more attractive. So I think figuring out how to convert users, people are dabbling in multiple games and monetizing on multiple games rather than being as whale dependent, but still there's some of that still kind of happens. I think is interesting. And then to have I know we'll probably get into Apple and IDFA in a little bit, but having the world kind of open up at the same time as IDFA was a 1-2 punch of crash back to reality for a lot of games. And I think that's where we're at now. I think we would have progressed along the path that we were progressing before. And so we had this massive spike, and now I don't think we returned to where we would have been. I think it did bring a lot of people into the fold, but people are still going out and trying to have those real world experiences now that they can. So it'll be kind of interesting to see where we land.
Yeah. What do you think, Natasha? I mean, we're getting shots in our arms now, right? We're kind of going a little bit back to some, I don't know, maybe quite what we were before, but some sort of sense of normalcy. How do you see, Natasha, in terms of like how's pandemic sort of impacted maybe player behavior in the games, or you're seeing that sort of sustain, now?
Yeah, absolutely. Overall, it's been a good time to be in digital entertainment compared to other industries, right? So very fortunate for us all there. So I think that we're seeing from the the increase of installs kind of during the peak of lockdown that we have this generation of players that are it's like the baby boomers, right? There's a lot of them and they're still in the game. And so, I know for ourselves, we have the situation where most of our players are elder players. I've worked on a lot of mobile titles where it's a lot more typical that the bulk of your players are at the top of the funnel. And so it's so it's a little different to be in a situation where most of our players are long-term players, and you have different monetization problems if you're trying to address the KPIs of your biggest set of customers, right? And so the monetization problems for D180 players are really different than they are for D7 players. So focusing on those kinds of problems instead of the kind of beginning of the funnel stage is interesting.
Yeah, and are we seeing more hybrid monetization from you guys in terms of mix of ads and IAPs as well too?
Yeah, we do. We do have a mix. It's more.
Does that change because of COVID, or is it just you always were that way and you're kind of just what's worked well for you in the past is sort of continuing to work well for you?
Yeah. So one of our biggest games ever merged that I've worked on a lot since I joined Big Fish. We launched it during the lockdown, right? And so it's kind of always been in this COVID ecosystem. So. I guess I don't really know the difference on.
Yeah, and it's done really well. So congratulations. It's been a great title for you. Any Casey or Patrick, anything else you want to add about monetization trends, or we think that and it could even relate to COVID or not, just maybe monetization trends in general that you've noticed that are interesting to you.
I mean, I think the what Natasha was saying about having the elder players kind of formulate a larger percentage of player base it becomes more of a content creation problem rather than a UA problem, which I think is a good thing because we're adding value to those users, which helps run a funnel at the end of the day. Those users will become elder players if you're doing your onboarding right. So I think it all makes sense.
Okay.
I would also add that just from the standpoint of the depth and breadth of a lot of these monetization systems within games. Your traditional games are just getting much, much better live ops, right? They're also looking at ad rev inside the game. So, I mean, as you're talking about like hybrid revenue models, it's IAP plus ads. Of course, IDFA kind of doesn't help ads at all, but just the depth that I'm seeing in a lot of games that were traditionally casual, taking a lot of like mid-core, like JRPG mechanics and translating those to the games that a lot of these players are just not used to these more in-depth systems. I think this is something that is like really interesting and what we'll be seeing a lot more of as far as like monetization strategies moving forward, and then just really relying on live ops for not just monetization, but like really engaging the player, keeping them within your game, because a lot of indications is they're playing a lot of different games now.
Oh yeah. Well, and I mean, you kind of Casey first brought it up with IDFA and the challenges. So we also just talk, let's just get into the elephant in the room, right? Apple, in terms of they, made a lot of changes. So certainly the biggest challenges, facing sort of the industry right now is, challenges within the Apple ecosystem, right? So as, they've kind of moved to prioritize, I guess, privacy, if you believe everything they say, over ad targeting. And so with the deprecation of IDFA and, all they're doing to make it kind of harder to track individuals, right? So, and normally this is a topic where we think about in context of UA and kind of marketing. So we don't need to get in there too, but I'm kind of curious on thoughts about, how this impacts game design or types of games. So, I mean, Patrick, you mentioned about move to, I guess, other monetization. So I guess I'm thinking like hyper casual, adding in kind of, hybrid monetization stuff there too. Is that what you're getting at with it too?
For sure. Yeah, I mean, just with a lot of this stuff, I think there's going to be a bit of meeting in the middle, where more casual games are going to, I mean, so it used to be like casual buy lives or continues, very simplified boosts, whatever, at one end of the spectrum, and then just like everything that you would have in an RPG, right? Like AFK Arena is a great example of choose one of the features they have in that game and the depth, and like that's a game in itself. And so I think there's going to be a bit more meeting in the middle by most games where they need a lot of these features for the engagement, but also the monetization. And I think that there's a lot more room for casual games to bring that. And then at the same time, reliance on ads is, I mean, this is going to become more dangerous. So at some point, a lot of these games that were relying on ads are going to have to do something with IEP. And there's tons of great examples throughout the industry for that.
Yeah, I mean, adding in, look, we saw in the news, Voodoo bought, a Beach Bum, right? And I mean, it's like, Voodoo was the poster child for doing such a great job in terms of hyper casual. Then now buying a company, and I think even, one of their studios is doing some stuff around incorporating IEP monetization. So, it makes sense. Casey, anything you like to add about, how's the changes within Apple around privacy sort of impacted maybe product decisions or design decisions?
I think it changed the playing field, but everybody's still on the same playing field. So, the people that were already able to kind of navigate that space are already going to be able to navigate that space anyway. I think if the intention was to kind of help smaller developers kind of get into the space and solve some of that, I don't think it'll really do it. But I think the importance of the data that you can get, and then the needs around predictive analytics and things like that, which is the world was kind of already moving that direction anyway. Now just the time frame is a little bit shorter and data points are a little bit less. And the importance of IP. We've been doing IP games for quite a long time, and that helps drive organics and kind of sidestep some of it. But from a design perspective, for sure, the hyper casual hybrid makes a whole lot of sense. That's again a trend that we saw before of taking this kind of core gameplay loop and wrapping a meta around it that gives it a little bit more stickiness, as opposed to what hyper casual was doing before, which is just pumping out games as fast as possible and then cross promoting. Getting those individual games to become a little bit more sticky kind of helps kind of build an audience that you can then still cross promote, but with a little bit more lifetime than the kind of quick turn and burn.
Yeah, you brought up cross promote too. It was actually one question I mean, because obviously we're seeing a lot of, been larger studios, publishers out there acquiring smaller, mostly hyper casual things, right? And with Zynga buying Rolik, you have, more recently Rovio buying Ruby Games, both out of Turkey, there too. But, so you see that, and really with the idea that these smaller games with organic downloads, a lot of, traffic on that can then be used as feeders, into, better monetizing games, or at least that's my, take it. But with cross promotion, so you mentioned cross promotion, Casey, too. What about, Natasha? What about what are your thoughts in terms of cross promotion? Right, it's been around for a while, so within the kind of publishers, marketing toolkit, but perhaps now even more important as we want to try to keep people on a portfolio of games, and and a Big Fish has a lot of games. What do you guys, anything insights around cross promotion or what you guys are doing that might be helpful for the audience?
I mean, no, it hasn't really been the approach thus far. I mean, obviously it makes sense, right? You keep the player for longer within your portfolio. You have like portfolio level KPIs and like LTV for that user. It makes sense. We might see more of that in the future. It hasn't really been, been the approach so far. Really still kind of more, like Patrick has been saying, I just really want to plus one that there's really no alternative to having like a game economy that's deep enough with varied enough items and rewards to support the kinds of things that you need to succeed, like a really robust live ops set, and all the monetization trends. Like, you're not going to be able to tack them into your game if the design of the game can't support it. And to do that, it needs depth and variety, and that's why you're seeing that more kind of sophisticated mid-core metagame coming to casual to support all the trends that that make those games monetize well. So it's still focused on the basics.
No, and I think the cross promotion. So anyone else have any things to add around cross promotion or having some sort of portfolio strategy? Are you guys doing anything? I mean, within your games? Or we move on.
Oh, I think the other piece of the Apple news is the Epic Apple results and kind of where that's going and whether that's going to drive payments to the web.
Big lead in. Good. Yeah.
And and driving payments to the web, all of a sudden you have a hub for bigger publishers with lots of games, right? So then you have a centralized service that's going to be around that. I think that opens up the door for more cross promotional opportunities as well. Yeah.
We're beginning to do some stuff with some of our partners around our machine learning algorithms. We make predictions on churn, so a lot of it has to do with timing of when to cross. So can all just do a banner cross promote, like check out this game, but trying to figure out kind of when to drive someone to another game, something we're doing. But Beck, you brought up the Epic and the Apple, and what's going on there too. So we'll maybe last question on Apple, okay, and then we can move on to other stuff. But it's an important thing, right, in the news, right? So Apple won the ruling, but there was that one aspect of the ruling too about being able to web billing and being able to have alternate pricing. Are you guys looking at web billing right now, Casey? Since you brought that up.
Yeah, I think probably everybody is, and figuring out a way to kind of pass those savings in a way that makes sense and adds value to players at the end of the day. For sure. I think it's a kind of, we'll see where things go. I don't think anybody knows for sure exactly how it's going to turn out. But for sure, that's something that we're actively exploring at Tilting Point.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense. But, I could see how some people might be afraid to do it, right? Because, okay, I can do it, but I think Apple doesn't want to do it. I mean, the reality is so many games just rely on getting featured, right? Or things else too. So, but, anyone else have anyone to comment on?
I mean, I would just.
Yeah, go ahead, Patrick.
Sorry. Reliance on featuring is, I think, less and less of a priority for many people. But as far as, taking them outside of the platform, I know that this is what a number of companies have already been doing, especially with high VIP or, high spenders, however you want to classify them. But having a portal on the web where they have a more tailored experience for the game itself, and where you forego this 30% on some of your more lucrative player base. So I know this already exists at a number of companies. So now it's just, spreading that towards the rest of the player base that you know, you can't quite go to the other 99.9% of people, because then Apple would have obviously been like, hey, what the heck's going on here? Now, you know, many people can do that.
Any examples of some people to look at? Some people are doing, I mean, I know Scope has done a nice job with WWE Champions, I think, you know, in terms of, they did even before the ruling too. They already were sort of creating a web portal there to a good effect on that. Any other examples of people that you think are doing a good job on moving people to web?
I mean, I would say that it's pretty standard for anyone in social casino.
Yeah.
So I mean, that throws a lot of individuals, you know, Playtika, Zynga, these types of very large companies that have, you know, large ownership of that space.
Well, and Natasha, you guys, Big Fish, you know, you guys have, you know, so big social casino, but also a web presence already, right? There's a lot of web games, you know, too. So
Yeah, that was kind of like the roots of the company, actually, is, you know,
Yeah.
portfolio of web games, and you know, there's already history of kind of a service of access to those games. So, you know, will that expand in the future? Maybe, you know, these I mean, the relationship with the platforms is pretty necessary right now, but we'll see how that goes in the future.
Right. Okay. All right, let's switch gears a little bit away from more tactical changes related to Apple, and now, you know, of course, they are, you know, important, right? You know, that's kind of the biggest challenges we've been dealing last year, but maybe something a little more fundamental about the future, you know, of gaming too. And in Casey, I'll start with you on it here too. It's like very big, broad question. I'm kind of frankly reminded of, you know, the best burrito I had in my life, which we had together, you know, in San Diego, because we were talking about this somewhat, and I can remember really well the burrito, but we're going to hear again your thoughts of, you know, any predictions you have or thoughts around the future as it pertains to the free-to-play gaming. You know, you guys have all been in free-to-play gaming now for 10 years, but looking forward, what are your thoughts on the market?
Yeah, I probably might be different from what I said over burrito, because the world is changing so rapidly. But yeah, I think the free-to-play model as it currently has been, and I've said this on panels probably with you in the past too, Ted, that you know, free-to-play as it's currently structured feels kind of unsustainable in the long term, kind of the way it is. I think movements towards battle passes and things of that nature align the interests of players a little bit more with the interests of people making games, as in we're building games to entertain people for a long term, rather than building systems with which to separate people from their money. So I think there's that piece of it. And not to go too much back onto Apple, but, you know, and I know maybe we'll talk about this again later, something that's been very interesting for my team is exploring the streaming services and subscription models. And it kind of comes full circle on my career, kind of starting with EverQuest back in the day, but finding subscription models where we're entertaining people and for longer periods of time, where KPIs that matter are engagement, which I think has a more closer affinity to people having fun while playing games, I think is attractive. So we'll see where those kind of net out. For sure, the free-to-play model towards cosmetics and things like that feels like it's gained so much traction, and you know, Fortnite being a monstrous example of being successful in free-to-play that can apply kind of across other games back into mobile, I think are interesting.
Natasha, you've also been in the free-to-play for 10 years, you said. So what are your thoughts a little future? Do you agree with Casey? You disagree with any of his points? Another point of view?
Yeah, I think, you know, talking about battle passes, you know, you mentioned subscriptions and a move to battle pass. It's like the battle pass, we had microtransactions. It's almost like a micro subscription. But yeah, it's like, you know, it's a great relationship between the player and the developer. I think that we will start to see more like competition in casual games. Again, to Patrick's point, sophistication in the metas and mid-core mechanics, more like real-time social mechanics. If you think about like what is the context that makes Fortnite work, like, okay, well, it's very successful based on cosmetics. It's because there's a context for showing off to each other. And so, you know, you can't always just like pick some parts of something and put it into another game and make it work. So, you know, like I guess Cooking Diary is a good example of someone who took the Fortnite model and adapted it like really well in its full context, because they leaned really hard into their guilds and like a context for people to see each other's avatars that was really able to like support their robust customization meta and battle pass. To make a battle pass work, like you either need a kind of like foundation of cosmetics from the beginning, or maybe later on in a game's life cycle when they have like a more robust set of items, like you need a lot of stuff to put in a battle pass. And so when a game tries to do that without the ecosystem to support it, then it usually doesn't work as well. I think that we'll see more hybrid and mashup genres in free-to-play mobile. It seems like kind of the trend of the casual space. Like we've seen absolute saturation of like every kind of customization meta with puzzle, but that is really only, I think, scratching the surface of the possibilities there. I think there's going to be a lot more exploration of like what kinds of combinations of metagame and core gameplay might feel really interesting together and feel really natural together. So I think we'll see more exploration there.
More room for combinations, because you just see that a lot in casual games too. Just is casual moving up to mid-core moving down to casual. But okay, Patrick, any thoughts in the future of free-to-play gaming? As we look at it, or is it sustainable? Yes, Patrick, your thought.
I definitely think it's sustainable, because even just looking at subscription, right, that falls into free-to-play. Okay. Unless you're talking about like subscription of a platform, and then once you are into or ecosystem, once you're into that, you get to play these games, which I would almost consider like more of a premium monetization strategy, where you just can't beat the starting point of this value proposition of it's free, right? Just come play this game. Of course, I think what Casey was highlighting more or less, or at least what I was interpreting, was, hey, there's some really good ways of doing it that is based on user experience, really good engagement, and monetizing off of desire, need, these types of things, rather than having some punitive system that is like really hardcore, trying to wring the players out of money, especially when they might misunderstand the value proposition, or just predatory tactics that are used. But as far as like free to play, of course, it will continue changing. I mean, just in the last 10 years, it's changed massively. It's almost gone through 2-3 large iterations. And I think, with each of these iterations, it's really just taken into account the player experience. And this is a good thing, and I would expect that to just continue. And when I'm almost certain we touch on NFTs, like this just brings in like a whole nother. Exactly. I see this kind of going at least hand in hand towards the future. I'd be very excited to see these two things.
Yeah, we'll get to NFTs
for sure.
But let's stay a little bit on this topic right now, which is when you brought up like subscriptions or the premium. So I've heard Battle Pass good, loot box bad. It's what about on is there a business we had with premium? I guess it sounds like Patrick says yes. Casey, what do you think? With these Apple Arcade, other services out there.
I would say that I don't necessarily back premium. Like I wouldn't.
Okay.
I myself wouldn't enjoy making premium games, at least like from an Apple Arcade standpoint, just because the reach isn't there. I think there's a bit of fracturing of the user base depending on like the access to the platform or ecosystem. So let's say that EA wants to start their own platform, or you go to Steam, or any of these. You're subject to being on that platform. So I wouldn't necessarily say, hey, everybody run out like premium is the ideal monetization model.
You heard it here first. Patrick says premiums yet. No.
No, I'm sticking with free to play.
Free to play. Yeah, you're a believer. I'm trying to imagine like we thought 10 years ago, like, executives sitting around saying, right, we're predicting this mega billion-dollar business where 5% of the people are going to do all the paying. Imagine that. I mean, I know that's the outcome right now, but I'm just trying to imagine sort of a world where, like, it's going to be billions. It's going to be bigger than the movie industry, and we're all celebrating and patting ourselves on the back. And what's even better? Just 5% of the people are going to pay for everything. It's like, but anyway, I digress. Casey or Natasha, anything to add? Or should we move on?
Yeah, I mean, I wanted desperately for premium to work just from a design perspective. I think that the amount of diversity that we have in genres that work in a free-to-play context is really challenging and really limiting from a creative perspective. Blending, I feel like the blending of genres is almost an act of desperation of saying, okay, how are we going to create something new that works? Okay, well, we'll take a core gameplay that we know works, and then we'll take something that's sticky and we'll tack it onto it. That seems like a lack of overall opportunities for diverse gameplay experiences. So I do welcome the idea of these subscription services, even though for sure, you're talking to a smaller audience, and exclusives aren't generally good for consumers as things go. That said, from a creative perspective, it does allow for design with that intent from the beginning to create different play experiences for consumers at the end of the day. So as that streaming and subscription stuff continues, and Netflix coming in, I think is a different model, which it's still limited to a subset of the audience, but that audience is larger than people that are a subset of a subset, as in iOS plus arcade subscribers. So I think going down that road, it becomes interesting. And then from a macro perspective of saying how these games are getting funded and built and all these other things, I think that opens up the door for a lot of other people to kind of smaller studios to be able to make those smaller games and be profitable, rather than spending what the free-to-play model has been, which is a group of people pouring their blood, sweat, and tears into a game, a free-to-play game for a year, to only roll the dice and launch. And even if they do everything right, chances are that they're never going to be able to turn a corner and run profitable UA without help from a publisher.
Right. I think you kind of hit the nail on the head. I mean, when I talk to indie game developers too, it's too hard to compete in free to play, right? It's just expensive, for the marketing side of things, but even just investing in the live ops to kind of keep, kind of everything that Natasha was saying, to keep the game kind of interesting, in the longer run, too. So yeah, agree. Natasha, Natasha, any thoughts? Your thoughts on Netflix? Maybe it's a little early to say right now, but predictions around this new entrant with so much money.
Yeah, I mean, I think it can only be a good thing, really. They have, I think in particular, so many IPs that would make good games, and maybe even bring new people in the games. But I'm sure that they're able to look at, the kind of overlap between players of certain or if I were Netflix, what I would do is look at the kind of,
I'm sure they're listening too, Natasha, so carry on.
The fans of, our major IPs, even, unexpected ones, like Selling Sunset, why not? Like, what kind of games do those players play, and like make them a branded kind of game for that. Yeah, I think it can be great.
All right. Casey, you briefly mentioned earlier about streaming services. So any comments? I mean, it seems, Stadia came out, with a huge fanfare, created a whole studio, hired some, industry luminaries to do that. They kind of since have shut down the internal studio, but Stadia does exist, and streaming services, exist, and, other people get in the space. What are your thoughts on the streaming services, Casey?
I think that's still, when I'm thinking of streaming services, I'm thinking of Apple Arcade and
okay, got it.
And understanding that it's just a matter of time for anybody else that's doing that has an app where you're streaming movies and TV to put games alongside it. It's another medium for it. As far as the actual cloud-based streaming stuff, the same skepticism that we had a couple of years ago, the technology is still there. It's still not there, and when it is, it's going to be great. I see both of those things as complementary. As in, if I'm looking at an app and I'm streaming a TV show, and then all of a sudden I want to take a break and play a game, doing that on my phone is possible already. Doing that on a set-top box, that makes a lot of sense, right? So building the foundation now on mobile, that's going to apply to the 10-foot experience and sitting in your living room. That all makes perfect sense. It's just kind of a matter of time when the technology actually catches up, and understanding that the form factor of the way you're interacting with games on a touchscreen is wildly different than the way you would be interacting with it on a television. So getting those pieces together as far as controllers and everything else, all of that stuff is solvable problems when the technology underlying it is there and ready.
Okay, still too early. Good. I think move on, unless anyone has any other comments here too. So, let's talk about I guess what the hottest topic there are too. I know, Patrick, you're eager to talk about it. It's NFT gaming, right? You can't read GameSpeak with talking about reading another article about an NFT blockchain gaming coming, just raising a huge amount of money at a huge valuation. So maybe Patrick, we'll start with you. Does it feel like kind of blockchain gaming is the next big thing in gaming?
Simply put, yes. But
right,
no. Yeah. Yeah, I think that there's just the underlying technology. There's just some massive benefits. And actually, one of the things that Casey just talked about with Stadia, where it was a hardware issue, a lot of the blockchain issues that we'll, I'm sure, get into are more software. Like really like the barriers to entry. Like it's just still so early that setting up, just trying to play a game. So like if you go into like Axie Infinity, and you don't, and you're just coming into blockchain like cold, you got to go set up a wallet. You got to go buy some ether. You got to, go set up your Ronin wallet. You got to I mean, there's just like step after step, and we're not even to like playing the game yet, right?
There's a lot of friction.
Yeah. So a lot of this is more just like software, making the user experience much more seamless. And I think this is just far faster than waiting for hardware. So I definitely think it's the future. It's just there are certainly some things that are in the way. But one thing that I was going to touch on before, like just really the underlying value proposition of you get to own these digital assets. I think once you experience it, there's a certain subset of games that just don't really make sense to play anymore. So as I was mentioning, a lot of mid-core or RPG games, like CCG, card collecting games, once you actually own this digital asset and you go back to a old school, it's still like the current, the current offerings, it just feels so different. And I think that there's a lot of interesting things that can be done with all of this, and I'm sure we'll jump into stuff more deeply.
And I guess, Casey, what do you think about blockchain? I mean, is there value? It's like what Patrick's saying. It's the idea of being able to own, the asset, right? Is that the ability to cash out and take your rewards with you, or to sell it to some people? Is that compelling enough? What do you think in terms of blockchain gaming?
I feel I'm definitely an NFT skeptic. I think that the technology is interesting. I think the idea of owning virtual items and then being able to sell them was an aftermarket that MMOs solved ages ago. I think the premise of blockchain is that it's separate. It's decentralized, which isn't really necessary when you're talking about the same kind of game, right? So then the value is because you can cash out more, but there's friction on the cash out process. The idea that there's going to be NFTs that you're going to be able to use in one game and play in a different game, we all know is kind of crazy, because there's all these walled gardens. You're going to have cooperation between different publishers and games teams to implement art assets that have very specific things that it's way too early to say, all of these things make sense. And I kind of take issue with the idea that I'm spending time in this game so that I can create something that has value, the earn to play model, because, well, that's just work. That's work. Like, I want to have fun in actual interaction with the game itself, not have my incentive to play be that I'm earning value at the end of the day. I think there's a space for that, but then it falls back into the same free-to-play problems where you have this very, very small minority of players that are paying to keep the lights on for everything else. I don't know. I think the tech is really interesting. I think that the way that it's going to be carried through, I think, is really, you know, the killer app for it hasn't been there yet, but there are a lot of smart people and a lot of money trying to figure it out, and I'm excited to see where it goes. I just don't think we're there yet.
It's early days, like you said. It's I mean, it's like, you know, we're talking about free to play gaming. Like 10 years ago started, right? You know, the biggest companies in gaming were not in free to play 10 years ago, right? You know, they kind of waited. They wanted to wait to see, you know, how it kind of played out, and that's why you had a lot of, you know, startups that became themselves big companies. Natasha, what are your thoughts on blockchain gaming, NFT gaming? Are people playing for fun? Or are they playing just to make money?
Yeah, so in short, no, I don't think it's the next big moment. Like, you know, like any technology, it's not so much the technology itself, but how it could be used and how it will be used. Something spectacular could come out of it. But I think that the whole discourse around, oh, well, you know, when you get a virtual good, like you don't actually own it, and finally you can own something, like I think that's like kind of a fallacious premise. I don't think that players are playing games to own things. That doesn't align with my understanding of player motivations. They know that they are spending into entertainment, and players are very comfortable with that. They are spending on entertainment the same way they spend on any other kind of entertainment, movies or concerts, and behavioral economics will even tell you that research shows that paying for an experience will make you happier than paying for an owned good. So I don't think that there's going to be this sudden shift where players are like, we've been wrong all this time spending on entertainment and we should have been owning goods. Like, that's not really a thing. And so could it possibly mobilize a different segment of payers? Like, you know, the current payers are people who are very comfortable spending on entertainment. Maybe there's a different segment of payers who weren't comfortable with that, and all of a sudden, they're willing to rise to the table because they need to own something. So yeah, and there might be some opportunity there. I think it's niche. I think, we're consumers, we're more trending the other way, right? Players or consumers are more and more comfortable without owning things, and in fact it's a hassle. They're much more comfortable with paying to maintain access to something. That's why we don't own DVDs and stuff anymore. Like, that's just, when we own things, they just become obsolete. So why bother? There's less risk in just continuing to pay a lesser amount to maintain access. So there's possibility for like a kind of super whale economy, but is it going to be mainstream? I don't think so. I don't think it aligns with consumer.
Well, right now it's, I mean, the MAUs associated with blockchain gaming, I think I read one thing was like last month was like, like 100, I don't know, 300 million playing free to play, and then 3 million playing blockchain gaming. But early days, right? But big amount of money, but it's still,
it's probably
Patrick,
probably under 1 million like 2 months ago.
Yeah, right.
I mean, one thing,
it's very early days. Yeah, I mean that's right. But I guess that's what I'm asking. It's like it is compelling. We're talking about how hard it is to acquire people free to play, how expensive it is too. So, whenever people are part of ownership of things, I guess conceivably they could be now more invested in terms of telling their friends about it and promoting it, the things. And so it's, it's not locked into the app stores. So with that, so the potential to grow it, I guess, again, early days, who knows, can't really, predict the future. But Patrick, you were the yes guy.
Yeah.
We heard who knows. So I want to give you an opportunity to respond. Yeah.
Well, I would ask one question, but then I also want to add some some more context to my thoughts around it. One is, all things are equal. You don't have digital ownership, and you do have digital ownership over items in a game. You're saying that you would rather forego any type of ownership, especially with a liquid secondary market. So me and you are both playing a game, and we can freely trade each other an item, or you need to use an item, or of course, I think this has very specific applications, because now we're talking about, again, more like mid-core games where you have thousands of items. But that would be my question. Like, all things equal, because we're early days, like Axie is probably the crappiest version of Pokemon that you could possibly have built. And if you look at a lot of the other crypto games right now, I think the quality is so low that we haven't quite seen a large scale actual offering to anyone that really makes sense and is kind of more of the eye opener of, oh, okay, like now I see the ecosystem can be fairly rich, especially from an engagement standpoint, because now you actually have rewards that are limited, right? So it's not even just a rarity factor of, RNG, like, hey, 1% of this item comes out of these boxes. You can actually limit the number of items that will exist in this box and start to have events around that. I think there's just a lot more richness and diversity on things that you can do from an event standpoint. The economics behind it, I think, could be incredibly interesting and lucrative, but it just keeps getting back to like, okay, all things equal, right? If I'm gonna play Pokemon Go and I get to own, Mewtwo, rather than just have it be one of these random Pokemons that I own, would you forego that?
And I go back to, why do we need blockchain to do that in the first place? Like, if we wanted to own a Mewtwo, create an aftermarket for Mewtwo, there's already an established means to kind of go do that, not necessarily in mobile, but on PC. Which is where NFT is living anyway for the exact same problems, right? So there's no real reason to need a decentralized ledger in order to be able to limit the amount of Mewtwo's that are available. You just do it. The developer could just decide, hey, we're going to do limited edition, and not only that, but we're also going to make it so that you can auction it in 6 months. Like, you don't need blockchain to do that. So it's solving a problem that didn't really exist. But maybe there's some, but I do see a path forward where that does become more interesting. But right now, I just don't see it as being a technical problem that it solves.
Okay. Well, like we don't, let's not turn this into a whole NFT panel too. I mean, but it does highlight, a couple of, it is obviously very interesting. The underlying technology, digital interest, extremely interesting too. Applies, obviously it's there, it's happening. There's a lot of enthusiasm, a lot of money going in this space, and it'll be interesting to see how this evolves, over time, because it is, definitely early days. So I think good comments, everyone. I mean, we don't have time to get into really big for the next one, but like, and I shudder to sort of even say the word, but the metaverse, but it's like, so, but and we're not going to get deep in the metaverse and the gaming and stuff too, but however, the news that Facebook's going meta, last week, right? And one of the sort of the linchpins sort of their, strategy is around, also VR, right? With they're investing a lot of money in Oculus. They're seeing that, VR gaming is being kind of entry into this immersive sort of virtual future. So let's talk specifically around VR gaming, because it's been around a while, like a lot of huge excitement, interest in, hasn't quite been there, but yet Facebook's continuing investing a lot. What do Natasha, maybe you start with you on thoughts VR gaming.
Yeah, I mean, I think VR gaming is great. Actually, like my husband got really deep into the VR chat community. He's a musician. He plays shows at a venue inside VR chat. I think, in these trying times where people are kept apart, there's very, meaningful impact to people feeling like they're together in a physical space. He said, I got to hug my best friend. It's been years. Like these are touching things. They're real, so it feels real to people. And I think that's really great. As far as scaling, I think, the problem is mostly just, the hassle of the hardware. It's not at all like picking up your cell phone, like you gotta put on the thing. It's not that comfortable. You get like lines all over your face, that kind of, so it's like, there's a trade-off. I think that's really the biggest barrier is the hardware, and that just kind of getting better and smaller and more comfortable. But is there a promise there? Yeah, it's really interesting for bringing people together.
Anyone else thoughts in VR gaming? Predictions? I know you guys are free to play mobile games specifically, so we're just what your thoughts on it?
Yeah, I mean, I struggle to see. I see use cases like that, which make a lot of sense, but I don't see it as reinventing the way that the internet works with a crappier UI. That's kind of like my kind of core takeaway on what these metaverse ideas are. It's a beautiful idea, but it's never going to replace that. For most use cases, I think for going listening to concerts, seeing people, having a deeper virtual experience to do those things certainly makes sense. I just don't see it as this mass adoption thing that's going to somehow replace the way that we do work and do things. Like, I wouldn't want to have to be doing this call and with a VR headset on and looking at you guys. I think this form factor works fine. It doesn't need to be replaced.
Right. Got it. Okay. Maybe switching gears a little bit. I mean, we started this whole thing about free to play. We talked about Apple, ecosystem and stuff too. But then we kind of been moving away about getting it out of app stores and ecosystems being controlled, right? Whether it's blockchain gaming, or that. But another area is, and the reason I thought about this is I thought I read a pretty compelling post, or article called "The Future Games Are Instant," right? And really was talking about web games and the kind of where they're headed. So. Maybe Patrick, your opinion here on that. I mean, I think the article, not a new thing, right? Flash, may it rest in peace. Was kicked off, Flash gaming, on the web, for a while, but now we're seeing with JavaScripts and other, lazy loading and stuff too, the possibility of, web games being interested. So anyway, Patrick, do you have any thoughts on instant games that you'd like to share or about the opportunity there?
Yeah, I mean, if we're talking on actual PC or desktop, I mean, I just see that as almost a relic of the past, and there is some, audience that will enjoy doing that, as you kind of have to live with a laptop, especially in
phone. You can do, there are a lot of people are doing in social channels promoting. I mean, right now it's like these more single player, very casual experiences, to be fair, right? It's very simple type of games. So, but yeah, that's where I'm kind of wondering whether or not.
Sure.
Yeah.
But I think like even instant games, like where like, you play games over a messenger. I think Facebook tried this a couple years ago. It really didn't catch on, or I mean, I played it a couple of times. It didn't really catch on with any of the groups of my gamer friends. So if it's missing that audience, we're not Gen Z or any of the newer kids, but I don't see a lot of traction there.
Yeah. Okay. Casey, what do you think? It's going to be does that open up a new audience? People who might be discover them on TikTok or, pick your favorite, social platform. Casey, what do you think about?
Yeah, I think it's anything that lowers barriers to entry, both for consumers and for developers, is a good thing for the industry. So it is curious, I guess, that 3-4 years ago it was all the rage and everybody was investing and starting up companies and things like that. Maybe that's what we're going to be saying in NFTs in a little bit. That it seems like there was a trend going there. It seems like there's some, Snap's doing some stuff that I think is kind of interesting. I think there's opportunities that are there to make different gameplay experiences, but for whatever reason it hasn't struck a note yet, and I don't know the answer to why. I think it's curious because the form factor seems to make sense.
Natasha, do you have the answer to Casey's question about why?
Maybe.
Yeah.
So I think they're interesting too, in the context of bringing people together easily. I played some of the text ones, Facebook Messenger ones, right? People can play together easily. That's cool. one reason that I'm not sure there's tons of opportunity in Facebook Messenger games is like, hey, I don't really trust Facebook. Like I started making games right at the end of the Facebook game era, and it was changing all the time. You would make it one way, things would change and didn't work anymore. Like you can't necessarily rely on what Facebook is allowing you to do. So why bother?
Yeah, no, good point.
Also, I mean, if you look at a game like Among Us, like this is bringing quite a few people together. That was like one of those like the stars aligning type games. And, this wasn't an instant game that was bringing people together, having these experiences.
Sure.
So
imagine what it could have been if it was.
Yeah, exactly.
It would have been really big.
Yeah, if only.
If only it was an instant game. All right. Maybe not. Okay, actually, speaking of web, and I'm just, and this might be simple yes, no kind of, questions from you guys. I don't know. And it's only because I'm kind of curious about it just because my background was in web, first too, and, not gaming, and stuff too, but, and when web started really took off and when like media and entertainment started getting really big, is whenever web technologies move towards more open source, right? With Linux, with MySQL, with Apache. When it went open source is when web became much more interesting. I'm curious if we might see the same thing happen in mobile game development, and I guess I'm asking in the context of Amazon making Lumberyard an open source project now. I think Open 3DX. I mean, does that happen? I mean, you guys have been building games, you got running studios and stuff too. Or is just Unity cheap enough and just good enough too that that's just going to use Unity forever? Or will mobile game development move the way towards more open source technologies where communities of developers will contribute to that? Anyone? I mean, it's kind of an esoteric sort of random weird question. It could be yes, no. Open source, yes or no. Or if you can add any small comments, it's fine.
I'd say yes. Open source is great. It not so much that the barriers to entry for Unity were high, because they particularly weren't. I think that anybody who's going to get serious about building a game could get on Unity and do it. But it's a closed platform versus open platform question, and having that competition is only going to make the technology better. Having very smart people contributing to the code base for Lumberyard can only be good for kind of the games industry in general. So open source is always a good movement.
Okay. Cool. All right.
I can only imagine though that it is an absolute logistical nightmare to get things done on any type of schedule. If you're even somewhat reliant on individuals that are not being paid by the company. So I think it's super interesting.
But the web happened, right? With the web communities. I mean, so like, there was content management systems, Adobe had them, it was like HP, they bought Autonomy, massive billion-dollar companies. But then Drupal came along with their own, CMS, right? And then there happened to be just people just invested in it and just in communities. But anyway, just was curious, since you guys are at the forefront of actually building games, not me. I was just curious if you guys were, thought about that. So, I like to find. We've been here. Good. Any other comments you want to add here? Or I'm heading to final question here because we've been on for a little while and we could probably keep going on. Particularly if we went back to NFT, we go on longer, but we won't. But any other questions or final comments? Okay, my final question is that I always like to end it with like with what kind of the good last question is and just hear from each one of you just what like game you've seen in the last free to play game that you were just particularly impressed with is not one of your own that stands out as an example of a great example. Maybe it was like some of the things you were talking about earlier. You guys were talking about mashup of styles or new monetization trend. Natasha, start with you. Just quickly, sort of a game you saw that you thought was impressed with in a short while.
Yeah, I have a few on my list. I guess I'll go with one. I'll go with Project Makeover. It is a mashup, but what I really think is impressive about Project Makeover is it has a super contemporary theme that's very relatable. So it's not like this kind of like cheesy homescapes world that like is kind of believable. It's like really plays into that kind of Netflix culture, pop culture, right? It's like its formula is like Queer Eye, wildly popular, and when something's relatable, it's easier to market, which we know is like one of the big problems. It's stickier, and so I think we're going to see a lot more kind of relatable, contemporary, Netflix-like themes in the future, and especially in casual mobile gaming.
Maybe by Netflix. How about you, Casey? Any title that kind of sticks out that you were impressed with?
Yeah, it was pretty probably boring, but Genshin Impact I think is incredible. I think that the promise years ago was that we were going to have these amazing high budget console experiences on mobile. To see that actually happen, I think is going to usher in this wave of these huge big budget games that are going to be incredibly push the technology and push what's expected from a mobile game forward, where we have this massive variety of experiences that you can have. And I think it was just a beautifully done game.
Cool. Hey, Patrick.
Damn. I bet Genshin. Yeah, I really like that, but I'd go with yeah.
So many games get released every day, and you picked yours, huh? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, just plus one to what Casey was saying, but another one that I was really into FPSs, played a lot of them. But Call of Duty Mobile, I kind of held off playing this for quite some time because who wants to play an FPS on a phone? And, downloaded it a couple months ago. I'm still fairly impressed by how smooth and the controls that they're using there. But also from the aspect of many of these Battle Royale games where the systems and the gameplay variation that they have is really interesting. Like they've really kind of doubled down on live ops, not even just from a monetization standpoint, because I mean there's tons there, but really from an events, making sure that content is feeling fresh and new. So I'm sure that there's an army of people working on it. It is, I think, fairly well done, especially since I was a heavy skeptic of playing any FPS on a cell phone. So
good, thank you. Thank you all. This is a good discussion. So really appreciate you sharing your thoughts on our mobile gaming market and where it's going. So thank you all very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.